Hi, I'm Donna Williams, and I'm going to be reading part 6 of Nobody Nowhere. I started at primary school and ballet classes at the same time. I'd become good at being told what to do, and people liked this. People liked Carol. Being double-jointed, I could tie myself up into knots. This would make people laugh, impress them, and make my mother proud of the ability of her dancing doll. My mother had now outdone her older sister. She had a dancing doll. Her sister only had boys. My mother would twist and pull and damn near break my legs off, getting me to do the splits, bending me over backwards. My older brother would enthusiastically hold down one of my legs as I laid on the floor, and they'd take the other leg and make me into a human clock. Like Carol, if they laughed, I laughed. They must have thought I was having a great time. Not only did they have a dancing doll, now they had a contortionist. What talent, what ability, what competition. I became the prized showpiece. Dance, little dancing doll. By the age of 11, I was on painkillers for rheumatism, which I developed in every joint of my body. I'd grind my teeth and punch myself to kill the pain. It felt like my bones were scraping together. I stayed on painkillers for years. I only danced until I was 7, and I never did learn left from right. At primary school, I learned to call myself mad. In my search for myself when I was 22, I returned to the house I'd grown up in, and the woman there showed me something that she discovered written on a wall in my grandfather's shed. It was after my grandfather had died. I'd been about 6, and it read, "Donna is a nut." Whether other children were my friends was irrelevant. My first chosen school friend was Sandra. I liked her big smiling face and the fact she had shiny dark hair. She was a big girl and jolly. The other children teased her. She became, in her own words, my best buddy old chum. Other children played school, mothers and fathers, doctors and nurses. They skipped ropes, played with balls or swap cards. I'd been sent to school with swap cards, and I gave them away before learning that I was supposed to swap them. Sandra and I would play the same game every day. She'd laugh, I'd laugh, we'd laugh. We'd sit side by side and scream in each other's ear. It made me laugh because it tickled. And I really didn't care what she was screaming, because she was the first person to play my games. Through playtime and lunchtime, Sandra and I would drink as much water as we could until finally we felt we would bust. And then we'd choke ourselves until we were turning blue, coughing and struggling to breathe. And then we'd try and push our eyes in order to see the colours, and we'd scream and scream until our throats were red raw. I thought this was great fun. I discovered that I could share physical sensation. In the company of others, my senses would usually cut off and become so numb that in order to experience myself, I had to push myself to extreme limits. Sandra found herself another friend. Because I didn't know how to cope with having 2 friends at once, I solved it by rejecting them both. I played alone on the monkey bars, looking at cards, climbing trees, pulling flowers apart, spinning around and around, and I stared up into the sun. I'd fall to the ground, and then I'd watch the world spin. I was in love with life, but I was alone. Other children were attracted to me, and they'd watch me in fascination, walking across the top of the monkey bars, swinging from a tree branch 30 feet up, in short, doing mad things. And though we went to the same school, my older brother had nothing to do with me. Where he had once been protective towards me when we were about 4 or 5 years old, I was now a nut, a spastic. I was an embarrassment. I don't blame him. Just as I lived in my own world, he was doing fine in the real world. Classes seemed to be this extension of the playground, and the playground seemed to be an extension of the classes, and the teacher soon learned not to let me go out to the toilet by myself because I'd wander and go off and not come back. I'd be out in the playground enjoying myself. It seemed quite natural to me that if I didn't like something, I could find a way to avoid it. Looking back, I can imagine how it was strange for the teacher to be called out into the playground because one of her pupils was swinging and singing on top of the world as I hung by my knees from the top of one of the school's highest trees, about 50 foot up. Everyone had gathered down below. They shouted, and I sang louder, and I swung higher and higher. Finally, I sensed their urgency, and it scared me. And fearfully, I climbed down. I still don't know if it was my actions which had frightened me, or the fear that someone else might come up and get me. The teacher reassured me I wasn't in trouble. Finally, I came down. And in my dreams, I replayed that day of defeat many times. After 1 week at primary school, I was taken out of my class, and with 4 other children, I was placed into a special class, which was called the Country Infant Room. Although we were a city school, these children had been selected from various other classes to train teachers in how to teach children in the countryside. And whilst other classes would change rooms, pupils and teachers every year, we would be stuck with one another for the next 3 years. My teacher was a hard woman, maybe for the same reasons as my mother. She too was the mother of an unusual child. The children in the class had special treatment of sorts. Every so often, some of us would go to psych and guidance. I remember very little of this. I remember the room up the narrow stairs. I remember the people with their boards making notes as I ran amok around the room. But the happenings there obviously didn't interest me. I went there for the next 7 years. My progress at school wasn't too bad. I loved letters. I learned them quickly. Fascinated by the way they fitted together into words, I learned those too. I could read, but I had merely found a more socially acceptable way of listening to the sound of my own voice. Although I could read a story without difficulty, reading aloud, I would confidently continue in spite of mispronouncing or inverting some of the letters or words. I'd used different types of intonation to make the story sound interesting, though I was merely experimenting with the sound of my own voice, and my tone probably didn't match the content of the story half the time. When I was 9 years old, they realized that I couldn't understand anything I was reading. My spelling was quite good. I'd grasped phonetics, and I'd memorized the difficult words, so I appeared to be quite clever. My writing was poor, and despite practice, it remained behind the progress of others year after year. As for maths, I would have done better if the teacher had given me numbers instead of coloured rods, because each rod was a different colour and length and meant to represent a number, but to me they just represented building blocks. So I'd stubbornly insist on building up towers, spiralling up until only one of the smallest pieces would fit on the top, and then I'd knock it down and insist on starting again. Though I could eventually add and subtract, I found fractions really impossible. The concept of halves and quarters was lost on me. I finally found a way to understand them by some sort of translation via my understanding of subtraction. I may have found it hard to grasp complexities, but my methods of trying were nothing if not complex. As for participation, I participated too much and never in the right ways. I chatted incessantly, which annoyed everybody else. People said I simply loved the sound of my own voice, and they were probably right. I could sing, but I couldn't sing with others. I would mouth the words. 10 years later, I finally would sing in the back row of my maths class, but I couldn't sing in music lessons. Shelley was in my class, and every year she'd have a birthday party, and every year her mother would charitably invite me. Kathleen was in one of the other classes, and every year she'd tell me that I was either 10th or 4th in the replacement list for her birthday party. And every year, Kathleen's friends would show up and she'd need no replacements. Kay was from my neighbourhood, and she was probably the most popular girl in our year. She'd line up her friends and she'd say, "You're my first best friend, you're my second best friend, you're my 22nd. I was 22nd. A quiet Yugoslavian girl was last. I was pretty, cheerful, sometimes I was entertaining, but I didn't know how to play with children. At most, I knew how to create my own very simple games or adventures and sometimes allow others to participate, as long as it was on my terms.